diste? One of the many this week that we are now finishing with this service has many glorious characteristics. One of the less glorious characteristics is that the priests have to preach more sermons in the course of a single week than they have to do in 3 months otherwise. So I'm sure you are tired of hearing my voice. As we speak, though, about St. George, we can speak briefly. All of you know his story far better than I. I have had the need to familiarize myself with it in its details only recently. You all have grown up with it in your years in this glorious temple dedicated in his honor and in his memory. However, he is called, as all the great saints are, by an epithet. He has an extra name, not just Saint Demetrius the great martyr, but Saint Demetrius the great martyr, o megaliteros, o megalomakeros, signomi. But also we call him Propeophoros, the trophy bearer. And I believe there is an element from his history, from his life, that causes him to have been known as the trophy bearer. But it is appropriate in this week that we speak of him in this way, for St. George was emboldened during a time of persecution to hold up the cross of the Lord, to hold it high, to glorify Christ before those who would bring death to him because of his Christian faith. He held the cross on high and paid for it with his death. And for this reason, at the end of this week, especially on Great and Holy Pascha and during Bright Week, it is good to remember what is the trophy that ultimately St. George still holds on high. It is the cross of Christ, not just the empty cross. Although he bears witness to that in his intercessions, in the reality that he still lives in the presence of Christ and offers intercession for all the church. He witnesses that the cross is empty, that Christ is risen, and that death is trampled and abolished. But also in his way of life and his way of death, he obeys the Lord's commandment that if anyone wishes to come after me, says the Lord, let him deny himself, take up the cross, and follow me. And his death and all the tortures and the agonies and the humiliations that accompanied it were the means by which he followed Christ to his own personal Golgotha, his own personal crucifixion, although he was not suspended upon a cross. And through walking with the Lord through the very valley of the shadow of death, he entered into glory and memory throughout all the ages. He gives us the example too. In the relatively small struggles and pains and unpleasantnesses of our lives. For most of us they are small, I don't say for all. Whatever challenge, whatever difficulty, whatever burden we are faced with, we may either rail against it, complain about it, fight with it, gripe about the injustice, or we may take the example of George, the great martyr, and shoulder that burden with Christ as our prototype and walk with the Lord through the valley of the shadow of death, down the Via Dolorosa, up the hill to Calvary, and find salvation at the foot of the Lord's cross. Through the intercessions of St. George and of all the saints, may we be blessed to find the peace of God, however our lives are going, whether they are perfect or whether they are weighed down with troubles. May God be with us, and may we always remember the glory of his resurrection. Christos Anesti.